Rule of thumb. Have you ever heard that? Well, guys, in this lesson, I'm going to teach you a new way to make recommendations politely in English. It's going to be totally new. I guarantee you've never heard this before. So if you want to learn this, then smash that like button right down there, and let's jump into the lesson. Okay, so sometimes English learners say this: you should, or you need to. Okay, they're trying to be polite, but this isn't a polite way to give recommendations. This sounds a little bit rude, a little bit controlling, So this isn't a good idea. I'm going to teach you another way to give recommendations, and it's with this idiom, rule of thumb. Okay, so what does this mean? Rule of thumb. Well, a rule, you know what rule means. Thumb. This finger is your thumb. Okay? Now, some people don't consider the thumb a finger. They say you have 4 fingers and a thumb. Other people say you have 5 fingers. Okay, so what's your opinion? Do you consider the thumb a finger? It's kind of a weird looking finger, isn't it? Anyway, that's called your thumb. Okay, so if you have a thumb, then smash that thumbs up button right down there. Okay, so rule of thumb. What does this mean? What is a rule of thumb? It's this. It's a general principle that is based on experience rather than precise calculation. Okay? Let me read that again. It's a general principle. Okay, this word means kind of like rule, right? It's a principle. It's a general principle that is based on experience rather than precise calculation. Let me give you an example. A good rule of thumb when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Okay? So here we're talking about a principle when you're making cookies. Just something to remember, right? Some kind of a principle to remember when making cookies. So that's the rule of thumb, okay? A good rule of thumb to remember when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Okay? So if you are trying to make cookies, you're reading the recipe, right? And it might say melt 1 cup of butter. Okay, so you put the butter into the pot or the saucepan and you melt it until it's like boiling, right? Well, a good rule of thumb when you're making cookies is to not melt the butter till when it's boiling. It's better to just melt it to the point where it's soft and your cookies are going to taste better. Okay? So that's a rule of thumb. Now, whose idea is this? Well, I heard this idea, guys, a long time ago. Someone told me. It's just a principle. It's a rule of thumb. Who made this? I don't know. It's just people, sometimes people, maybe cooks or bakers came up with this rule of thumb, right? So it's a principle that some people use. Okay, so that's what rule of thumb means, guys. It's a principle. So it's a general principle that is based on experience rather than precise calculation. Okay, so if I tell you a good rule of thumb when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Am I giving you a precise calculation? No, I'm not telling you exactly how soft the butter needs to be, right? I'm just giving you a principle here. So we can use the idiom rule of thumb. Okay, so a good rule of thumb when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Okay, I can say this, or I could say the rule of thumb when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Okay, so I can either say a rule of thumb or the rule of thumb. If I say the, it sounds more confident. Okay, it sounds like I'm telling you politely, this is polite. Remember? This is a polite way to give you a recommendation. Okay, so I can either choose a rule of thumb or the rule of thumb. If I use the word the, it sounds more confident, like I'm telling you from my own experience. Imagine if I've made hundreds of batches of cookies, and I'm telling you, the rule of thumb when making cookies is to not melt the butter completely. Okay, there I'm telling you, based on my own experience, this is the secret. Okay, this is the principle. This is the thing you need to remember. The rule of thumb is to not melt the butter completely. Okay, this is polite because I'm not telling you what to do. Hey, you need to not melt the butter completely. Right? That sounds like I'm trying to control you. Right? So this way is better. It's more polite. Okay? Now, the rule, if you say the, you cannot say the good rule of thumb. Okay? So you can either say a good rule of thumb or the rule of thumb. Cannot say good if you use the. Okay? So it's like this. A good rule of thumb or a common rule of thumb or an important rule of thumb. You can choose. You can put one of these words in here, or you don't need any word in there. You could just say a rule of thumb is whatever. Okay? But it's common to put one of these words in here as well. So a good rule of thumb, a common rule of thumb. If you're going to use the word important in here, then this word needs to change to an, because this word starts with a vowel sound, right? So an important rule of thumb is whatever you want to say, guys. Okay, so this is a polite way to give advice. It's a nice way to give advice because it's not saying, that it's your opinion. You're just kind of saying a principle. You're giving a principle without making it personal, that it's you telling, I'm not telling you how to make cookies. I'm not your boss, right? So that's why I'm choosing to say the other way. I'm choosing to use, the rule of thumb or a rule of thumb. So like if I said this, you should not melt the butter completely when making cookies. English learners might say this. They might be trying to be polite. The problem is this sounds too controlling. You should not melt the butter, right? It's, this is pretty strong language. Most of the time, native English speakers use other ways to be polite, other ways to make it less direct. And that's what I'm trying to teach you in this lesson. Now, another way you could do this, another way to be polite is also sometimes people say this. They say you should not melt the butter completely when you make cookies. They say. Who is they? We don't know. Okay, this is just a way to avoid saying me. I say you should not melt the butter completely. right? So very often in English, we say they. Now, who is it? Well, we're talking about maybe experts or other people. Other people say, if I tell you this, they say you should not melt the butter completely when you make cookies. I'm not even thinking about a specific group of people. I have no idea. The reason I'm choosing this construction is because I'm trying to, maybe I'm trying to be polite, or maybe I don't really know. Maybe I haven't baked very many cookies in my life, and I'm just telling you what I've heard. Okay, they say you shouldn't melt the butter completely. Okay, so you could say this. They say it's not a good idea to melt butter to the point of boiling when making cookies. Okay, they say it's not a good idea to melt butter, to the point of boiling when making cookies. So they say. Maybe this is talking about the experts or just unknown people. It's a principle. This is like just a principle. They say it's not a good idea. Okay. Look at this. Look at this example here. They say you should avoid salt and sugar if you want to be healthy. Okay. They say you should avoid salt and sugar if you want to be healthy. Well, who's they? I don't know. Okay, so let's say you and me are talking about health, and you're saying, I wonder what the best way is to be healthy. I might say, they say the best way to be healthy is to avoid salt and sugar. Then you might say, who says that? Or who's they? You might say, who's they? And I would say, I don't know. I'm just telling you something that I've heard. Okay. You might say, well, I eat lots of salt and sugar and I feel okay. I feel great. Right? So, if I say they say, it's either because I'm maybe trying to be polite to you and give you a recommendation without me telling you what to do. Hey, you should avoid eating salt and sugar. I might be trying to be polite, or maybe I don't know, and I'm just telling you something I've heard. Okay, let's look at another example. They say it's not a good idea to eat before bed. Okay, they say it's not a good idea to eat before bed. This means sleep. Bed here means sleep. Okay, it's not a good idea before you go to sleep. Why am I saying this? They say it's not a good idea. Well, maybe I'm trying to give you advice. Imagine if you and me are talking about sleep. Okay, and you tell me, it takes me so long to fall asleep every night. I have bad insomnia. Well, then I might try to help you and give you a recommendation like this. I might say, they say it's not a good idea to eat before bed. Because if I tell you, hey, don't eat, you shouldn't eat before going to bed. That's a bit rude. That's too direct. That's like I'm trying to be your parent or something, right? If we're just friends, I'm not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. So that's why I might say this. They say it's not a good idea to eat before bed. But maybe I'm saying this because I actually don't know. Okay, so maybe I'm just telling you what I've heard, but actually I don't know if it's true or not. So I might be trying to distance myself from the truthfulness of this claim. Okay? So it could be for two reasons. I might say this for two reasons. One is to be polite. Another is because I want to distance myself from this. Okay? In case it's not true. Look at this example. A rule of thumb in bodybuilding is to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. Okay? A rule of thumb in bodybuilding is to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. Okay, now, am I telling you an exact calculation here? Do you have to measure out exactly how many grams of protein? No, I'm just giving you a rule of thumb. Okay, so if you and me are talking about bodybuilding, and maybe you want some advice, maybe I have a bit of experience in bodybuilding, I might say this: a rule of thumb in bodybuilding, or bodybuilding is where you're trying to get big muscles. Okay, a rule of thumb in bodybuilding is to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you should aim to eat 200 grams of protein per day. Now, why did I use the word consume? It's because consume includes both food and drink. Okay, if I say the rule of thumb in bodybuilding is to eat 1 gram of protein per day, well, then I'm talking about food. But the thing is, a lot of people who do bodybuilding, they might drink protein shakes. And you don't eat a shake, you drink a shake. So if I want to include eating and drinking, this is the best word to use here: consume. Consume means eating and drinking. So, yeah, this is just a principle. I'm giving you a principle. Okay, now I could say this. They say you're supposed to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. Okay, if I say this, they say, maybe I'm trying to be polite to you. Maybe I'm trying to give you some polite advice. They say you're supposed to do this. Or maybe I'm saying this because I'm not sure. I'm just telling you what I've heard. I heard something and I'm telling it to you. But maybe I don't have any experience in this. Okay? They say you're supposed to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day, but I'm not sure. I've never done bodybuilding. Sorry, I can't help you. Okay? So if I said this, you should consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. It's like I'm your coach. I'm your fitness coach maybe, and I'm telling you, you need to, okay? You need to consume 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight per day. It's too controlling, right? It's a bit rude. That's why I'm choosing other ways. Now, there are many ways to make this polite. In this lesson, I'm just teaching you one way that you've probably never heard of. Okay, I've made other videos about how to be polite. Like, you might want to consider consuming 1 gram of something like, you might want to consider. That's another way to make this polite. You might want to consider. I've made videos about that. But in this lesson, I'm teaching you with the idiom, a rule of thumb. So a rule of thumb in carpentry is measure twice, cut once. Okay? A rule of thumb in carpentry means working with wood. Okay, so if you build tables and you build cupboards or you build, I don't know, anything out of wood, then you are a carpenter. That might be your job. You make tables and chairs and things out of wood. You are a carpenter, and the kind of job that you do is carpentry. Okay? So a rule of thumb in carpentry, remember, this means it's just a general principle, a principle based on experience, not on exact measurements. Okay? The rule of thumb in carpentry is just this. This is a good principle to remember for carpentry. Measure twice, cut once. Okay? So if you want to cut something, right? First you need to measure it. Measure it twice to make sure you're right. Because if you measure it once and you make a mistake in your measurement and then you cut the piece of wood, it's too late then. You can't go back and fix your problem. And you're going to need to go buy a whole new piece of wood. So this is a good principle to remember, right? This is a good rule of thumb in carpentry. Measure twice, cut once. Okay, does that make sense? We could also say, in carpentry, they say you should always measure twice before making a cut. Okay? In carpentry, they say you should always measure twice before making a cut. You know, there are different ways to say things in English, guys. There's a lot of ways. There's a lot of different kind of constructions. There's a lot of ways you can make a sentence. A lot of different ideas. A lot of different words and phrases. There's different ways to build a sentence. You know, you could say this, yeah. You know, in carpentry, they say you should always measure twice before making a cut. Now, if I am a carpenter, if I'm giving you advice, real advice based on my own experience, I could tell you the rule of the rule of thumb in carpentry. I'm saying the rule of thumb because I'm confident about this. The rule of thumb in carpentry is measure twice, cut once. Okay? So, yeah. But if I'm not a carpenter myself, if I don't know much about carpentry, and you ask me, hey, Mark, do you know anything about carpentry? I could say, not really. I have no experience. But, you know, in carpentry, they say you should always measure twice before making a cut. So I might give you this rule of thumb. I might give you this principle, even if I've never done this. Maybe I have no experience in this. I'm just going to tell you what I've heard, right? Or I might be doing this to try to be polite, you know, so that you don't think I'm trying to be controlling, right? Does that make sense? So look at this. A common rule of thumb is to save 20% of your income. Okay, so imagine if you and me are talking about finances. You know, I might say this. A common rule of thumb is to save 20% of your income. Okay, that's just a rule of thumb. Or I could say this. They say you should save 20% of your income. Okay, now look at the word you here. This is very important. So listen up, guys. The word you doesn't mean you. This word means people. Okay? They say people should save 20% of your income. Okay, so very often in English, the word you doesn't mean you. Because they don't even know you. Who is they? Let's say experts. Let's say financial experts. Do they know you? No, they don't even know you. So we don't know who these people are, and we don't know who these people are. This is just kind of a vague group of people, and this is a vague group of people, right? We're just giving a principle here. So if I tell you this sentence, if I say to you, they say you should save 20% of your income. This you doesn't mean you. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about people. So a way I could say this is financial experts say people should save 20% of their income. Okay? Experts say people should save 20% of their income. But most of the time when we talk normal English, we say you in this situation. And native English speakers know when this means you or just people in general. Okay, so if I say this sentence to you, I'm trying to be polite by saying that, by not talking to you. Being polite to you by talking about people in general, right? They say you should save 20% of your income. Okay? Yeah. So look at this example. An important rule of thumb when making rice is to leave the pot covered until it's done. Okay, so this is an important rule of thumb, guys. Have you ever made rice? So when you make rice, you're tempted to take the lid off and look at the rice, right? You're tempted to peek and see if your rice is done yet, right? So you take off the lid. Come on, hurry up, rice. I want to eat you, No, that's a mistake, okay? So an important rule of thumb when making rice is to leave the lid on the pot. Leave the pot covered until it's done. Why? Well, because you want your rice to be nice and fluffy, right? If you're always peeking at your rice every 2 minutes, your rice is not going to be nice and fluffy, okay? Because the steam is going to escape. If you want nice fluffy rice, you have to let the steam build up inside the pot, okay? So this is just a rule of thumb, okay? Is it a am I telling you an exact measurement here? No. I'm just giving you a general principle. Leave the lid on the pot until it's done. It's just a rule of thumb. It's a good rule of thumb. It's an important rule of thumb. Okay? Or I might say this to you. The rule of thumb when making rice is to leave the pot covered until it's done. Okay? Now this sounds a little bit more confident because I'm using the word the. And maybe I'm using the word the because I've made rice hundreds of times in my life. I know this is the rule of thumb. I know this is a good principle. Okay, so you might ask me, hey Mark, how do you make rice? I could tell you, well, double the amount of water for however much rice you're making. Okay, so if you want to make a cup of rice, then use 2 cups of water and put it in a pot or a saucepan. Both words mean the same thing. And cover the pot. Okay? Bring the water to a boil. And then turn down the heat to low heat. And just let it sit there for a while. Okay? And don't be peeking at it every couple of minutes. So the rule of thumb is to leave the pot covered until it's done. Okay? So if I say this, I'm being polite. Okay? The rule of thumb in making rice is to leave the pot covered. Okay? So this is a better way to say it than if I said, don't peek at the rice, you idiot. Or you should leave it covered until it's done. Then it sounds too much like I'm your boss. Okay. Now, the reason in this case I might say the rule of thumb is because it's not optional. Okay. This is the principle for making good rice. You cannot make good rice if you're always checking the rice. So this rule is not optional. This principle is not optional. It means you have to do it. Otherwise, your rice is not going to be nice and fluffy. Okay? Will it be edible? Yeah, sure. You don't even need a lid to make rice. You can just keep the lid off if you want. You could put 1 cup of rice and 10 cups of water if you want. Just boil the rice until it's boiled and then you can eat it. Great. Okay, it's edible. But if you want really good rice, like fluffy, light and fluffy rice, well then this rule of thumb is not optional. That's why I'm saying the rule of thumb means this is really important. Okay? The rule of thumb when making rice is to leave the pot covered until it's done. That's my advice. That's the rule of thumb. Okay, do you agree with me? Do you not agree with me? I think most people agree with me. That's why I'm saying the rule of thumb. Okay? This isn't just my idea. This rule of thumb is many people's opinion. And it's based on experience. It's not about like a strict calculation here. Just a general principle. Okay, look at this example. A rule of thumb for writing an essay is to spend 25 to 30% of your time planning. Okay? So here's an idea for you. Here's a principle. I'm giving you a principle. Imagine if you ask me, "Hey Mark, how should I write an essay? How long does it take to write an essay?" I might tell you, well, a rule of thumb for writing an essay is to spend 25 to 30% of your time planning before you even start writing. Okay, this is a good principle, is to plan your essay before you start writing. Maybe make an outline. You start by trying to figure out what your thesis statement is going to be. Your thesis sentence is like basically the purpose of the whole essay. It's the sentence that gives the essay its structure. It tells people what they're going to be reading about. Okay? So, first you need to spend some time planning it. Think about what your thesis sentence is going to be. Think about what your points are going to be. Maybe spend 30% of your time planning it out, and then writing it'll be a lot easier. Okay? So that's a rule of thumb. Okay, so I might tell you this. A rule of thumb for writing an essay is to spend 25 to 30% of your time planning. Okay? This would be better than if I said you should spend 25 to 30% of your time planning. Okay? This is more polite. Okay? A rule of thumb. Or I could say the rule of thumb. Maybe I've written lots of essays and I know the main problems people have. So I might say the rule of thumb in writing an essay is to spend a lot of time planning before you start writing. Okay? Write out your outline. Okay? Before you start writing, spend at least 25 to 30% of your time planning it out. That's the rule of thumb. Okay? So that would mean I'm a little bit more confident. The rule of thumb for doing this. I'm telling you, the secret, the principle that you should remember is to do this. That's the rule of thumb. Okay? I could also say this. They say you should spend 25 to 30% of your time in planning when writing an essay. Okay, so if you ask me, Mark, how long does it take to write an essay? I might say, well, it depends, but they say you should spend 25 to 30% of your time planning before you even start writing. Okay, if I say this, they say, I'm trying to be polite to you. I'm not saying you should do this, right? This is more polite. Or maybe I've never written an essay before in my life. So then I don't know. So I might say, I have no idea how long it takes to write an essay, but I've heard, or I could say, they say you should spend about a third of your time planning before you start writing. Okay? So guys, there are different ways to say things in English. And certain phrases can maybe have different meanings depending on the context. So, like, if you know I'm a teacher, if I'm a teacher and you know that, then if I say this, they say you should spend 25 to 30%. Well, I'm trying to be polite by not telling you. You know that if I'm a teacher, I've written many essays myself and I've coached a lot of students on how to write essays. Okay? So, but if you know I'm just a normal person who has no experience in writing an essay, you might still ask me. You might say, "Hey Mark, do you know anything about essay writing?" And I might tell you, I have no idea how to write an essay, but they say you should spend 25 to 30% of your time in planning when writing an essay. Okay. Now, the reason I said they say here, maybe I'm trying to distance myself from the truthfulness of this. Maybe I have no idea if this is right or wrong, right? So I'm trying to distance myself. I'm trying to show you that I'm distancing myself from this so that, because I don't want to give you wrong information. Okay, so I'm just telling you, they say you should spend 20 to 30% of your time planning when writing an essay. But I don't know, I've never written an essay before. Okay, so sometimes in life, we want to distance ourselves from the things that we have heard. So we want to give advice, or we want to tell people what we've heard, but we don't want it to sound like we believe it. Okay, so in that case, this is a good way to kind of avoid responsibility here if this is wrong. Because if I'm giving you advice and I'm not sure what the right answer is, well, I don't want to give you bad advice, right? So I might say this to distance myself, okay, from this. So, it depends on the situation, depends on the context, right? Look at this example, guys. Children should be taught this important rule of thumb before crossing train tracks. Stop, look, and listen. Okay? Children should be taught this important rule of thumb before crossing train tracks. Okay, this is a rule of thumb. It's something people should remember. It's a principle that you should just remember. It's a good idea. Children should be taught to stop, look, and listen before they cross train tracks. Right? It's not a good idea to be driving in your car and just fly over the tracks, right? Don't do that, guys. Otherwise, you're going to get broadsided. Broadsided means that something hits your car on the side. Okay? So if this happens, if you don't stop, look, and listen, okay? You just stop, look both ways, and listen. Can you hear any train? Can you see a train? No? Then you can cross. It's safe to cross. If you don't follow that rule of thumb, well, you're going to be just driving across the tracks one day and you're going to get broadsided by a train, right? So this kind of accident, we often use the word broadsided, okay? So we got broadsided by the train. Imagine you and me are in this car. Well, we got broadsided by the train. That means the train hit the side of our car, not the front. Okay, if you have an accident like this, that's not broadsided, because this is not the broadside of the car. Okay, the front of the car is not the broadside of the car. The front of the car is actually the narrow side of the car, right? Broad means wide. Okay, broad. If a man has broad shoulders, his shoulders are very wide. Okay, do you have broad shoulders? Okay, I don't have broad shoulders, guys. I've got average shoulders, I think. So broad means wide. So the front of the car is not the wide side of the car, right? It's the other side, the side of the car. Like if you look at a car from the side, that's the broad side. Just like this train. We're looking at this train, right? This is the broad side of the train. The front of the train is not the broad side of the train. Okay, so if we drive into the train like this and have an accident like that, then we are broadsiding the train. Okay, then I would say we broadsided the train. But in this picture, The train is broadsiding the car. Okay, so the car got broadsided. Does that make sense? Yeah. It hit the broadside of the car. Hey guys, have you ever been broadsided? Have you ever been broadsided in your life? I've never been broadsided. And I've never broadsided anyone else. That's great, guys. I'm very thankful about that, because being broadsided is a very dangerous kind of accident, because, you know, like if you're sitting right here, right? Imagine you're sitting here, and the train broadsides us. Well, you're dead, guys. You're dead meat. You're dead meat. There's no way you're going to survive that. But imagine if you have an accident this way, a head-on collision. Okay, this kind of a collision is called a head-on collision. If you have a head-on collision, you might survive because you've got a little bit extra crumple zone. Okay? The hood of the vehicle, like the front part of the vehicle, is called the hood. The hood of the vehicle acts as a crumple zone, right? That means you don't get hit right away. First, the car goes like this. It crumples before you get hit. So there's some crumple zone. So if you ask me, I would rather be in a head-on collision than get broadsided, because in a head-on collision, I don't know. I don't know. I'm not an expert on collisions, guys. It just seems it seems the worst possible collision if you get broadsided, because you don't have any crumple zone. But then again, I don't know. If you have a head-on collision, both vehicles are going against each other, so it's like double the impact, right? Oh man, I don't know, guys. Better not to get into any accident. So I hope you're safe today. I hope you don't get into any accidents, guys. But let me know, have you ever been broadsided? Guys, let's do some homework. I don't want this video to be too long. It's already too long, guys. So I want you to tell me a good rule of thumb. What's a rule of thumb? You know, and it could be anything about, it could be any rule of thumb, okay? It could be about cooking. It could be about some kind of job. It could be about money. It could be about eating. It could be about working out. It could be about time management. You know, you could say a good rule of thumb is to get out of bed immediately after waking up. You know, as soon as you wake up, don't check your phone, waste half an hour scrolling through Instagram. No, just get up and get out of bed, go take a shower. That's a good rule of thumb. You could say, I don't know, a good rule of thumb is to always take an umbrella with you if you live in Vancouver. Okay, if you live in a rainy place like England or Vancouver, a good rule of thumb would be to take an umbrella with you. It might start raining. Usually rains in those places, right? You know, you could have a rule of thumb about anything, guys. So let me know your rule of thumb down there in the comments. I look forward to reading it. And guys, as always, I love you very much. Hope you're doing great today. Anyway, guys, have a great day, and I'll see you over in the next episode of Mad English TV. Take care.